How often is it that you use information that you learned from your history, English, math, and science classes back from high school, middle school, and even elementary school? I can almost guarantee you that you don't use the materials that you learned from those classes on a day-to-day basis today. According to a bachelor's degree studies, in order for students to gain a comprehensive education which will help serve them throughout their lives after graduation, almost all universities in the US require that students complete general education requirements. The goal of general education requirements is to aid in the making of a well contributing member of society. Yet this is not the case. General education requirements in universities are very controversial as they are often overwhelming and unnecessary. Many studies and researchers in the education field argue that general education does not accomplish its goals. Due to the inconvenience and irrelevancy, general education requirements in college should be abolished. First, I will talk about how the material from general education classes has already been covered in previous school years. Then I will discuss how some of the courses are irrelevant and may not be beneficial to students' majors. And finally, I will look at how the total amount of hours required for general education classes can be a big waste of time and money. First, let's get into how general education classes are just a repeat of what students have already learned from previous school years. First, general education classes have been taught in a majority of the curriculum in high school, and second, how 3/5 of the college get a C or worse in general education. In an article by Jessica Williams, she summarizes it by saying we spent 13 years in general education courses. Why are we wasting time rehashing and what we already know we aren't interested in, and we could be spending that time adding to our resumes? For a majority of students, if they take a class where they have already learned the material or even have a somewhat grasp on the subject, they will most likely become uninterested and bored and have no interest in completing school tasks and will lack the ability to prioritize. When a student graduates high school, most of them intend to continue on to college. They have the idea that while they can break away from all general classes and just focus on what they want to learn. However, for almost all students, they find that this is not the reality. Just like high school, they find that they have to take approximately 2 years in general studies in order to attend and graduate with the major of their choice. Advocates of general education contend students should not be allowed to complete college without learning some essential knowledge. According to the Washington Post, locally, nearly every DC university received a C. Johns Hopkins in Maryland, which received an F last year, raised its grade to a D. They got partial credit this year for requiring math or science, but not both. The University of Maryland got a D. James Madison and George Mason universities both earned Bs. The University of Virginia got a D. Public institutions generally fared a bit better than private ones in the report. 12% of private colleges studied received F grades, but only 5% of public colleges. After examining how general education classes are just a repeat of what students have learned already from previous school years, we can take a look at how some of the courses are irrelevant and may not be beneficial to students' majors. First, general education classes can have nothing to do with students' majors. And second, how the material taught in courses is usually forgotten quickly. A student from Princeton recalls on his experience with general education. He states, quote, "The time spent on these courses could have been used in gaining valuable experience such as internships or a full-time job that will actually help me in the real world." End quote. This shows how big of an impact one pointless GE requirement has in the long run. In fact, general education teaches very little of the skills required to succeed in the real world. Elise Martirano, a student from Harvard, shares her point of view about general education classes. She states, quote, the sheer amount of range of classes required of students makes them ineffective. For humanities students like me, taking 2 different science classes and different math classes will not benefit my education. Nor is it likely that I will retain the information to apply the knowledge I learned in classes in subject areas that challenge me deeply. Likewise, students in the natural sciences are unlikely to reap any meaningful benefits from taking a literature class. End quote. Not only are situations like this inconvenient and unenjoyable, but they can also greatly damage a student's education if they do poorly in these classes or are forced to spend an inordinate amount of time attempting to succeed in subject areas that they have always struggled with. Most students do not learn financial literacy and other crucial skills from their general education courses, which is critical given the capitalist system we live in. Instead, General education requirements push courses that focus on memorization of facts. For example, GE requirements in the field of arts focus on memorization of dates, artworks, and other such things. This may be interesting for some students, but having such classes as a requirement and not optional is a big mistake. Now that we understand how some of the courses are irrelevant and may not be beneficial to students' majors, we can discuss how the total amount of hours required for general ed classes can be a big waste of time and money. First, taking general education classes can be a waste of money by spending it on classes that don't even interest students. And second, how it increases student debt significantly. The previously mentioned student from Princeton includes a story about his friend's experience with general education. He shares, quote, "A friend of mine who is one semester away from receiving her criminal justice degree has to give up an internship in order to take a course titled The Violent Earth, which satisfies a GE requirement," end quote. Clearly, the experience she would receive from her internship would make her a way better contributing member of society, as she would be more knowledgeable professional in the criminal justice world. Instead, her summer will be spent learning a topic that she will most likely never use, putting her behind in her profession. In addition, she will lack experience in the field, which may make it harder for her to find a job and start paying off her student loans on time. According to Medium.com, general education requirements may sometimes force students to spend an extra semester at a university to get their degree. This results in students borrowing more money and contributing to the $1 trillion student debt in the U.S. Department of Education, and universities work together in order to reduce or modify GE requirements, which may cause a decrease in student debt, improve the economy, and improve society in many ways. Clearly, if less classes are required, then less money will be needed to cover the costs. This may lead to a lack of jobs, as not as many professors will be needed to teach the classes. Yet this is one way that could cut the national student debt. Although the initial creation of general education requirements was intended to better prepare students for the real world, it is apparent that they are no longer about creating well-rounded students, but about forcing students to fork over more cash to pay for these mandatory courses. First, I talked about how material from general education classes has already been covered in previous school years. Then I discussed how some of the courses are irrelevant and may not be beneficial to students' majors. And finally, I looked at how the total amount of hours required for general education classes can be a big waste of time and money. And based on the ideas and reactions today, it is indeed evident that general education requirements in college should be abolished due to the inconvenience and irrelevancy. There are countless problems within our society, economy, and just everyday lives. Most people do not possess the skills needed to deal with these problems since the education system has failed to teach them. In order to start coming up with a solution to these problems at a faster rate, the education system must be modified. Thank you.